Hello, everybody. Get started in just a couple minutes. Hi, Dana.
Did you wear your t-shirt outside yesterday with the heat wave?
No t-shirts. Trying to conserve all the warmth that I possibly can.
Chewy has transitioned from a fleece outdoor wear into a t-shirt, so he's staying with the weather. I put him on screen, but he's MIA.
I think we all need to form a support group. Like, why do we live in this climate? Like, this is not necessary. We're not required to. There's plenty of other places we could all go.
And leave all this?
This is now a climatology support group. We just need to get out of Western New York.
Come on, my neighbors loved it this morning when I went to take the garbage out and I did like a triple sow cow in the driveway and nearly went down with the garbage can. So it's really entertaining.
That's why we stay right there.
There you go. That's the winner right there.
Or the ice
Oh, it was-
falling off my house. It almost gave me a heart attack last night.
Somebody could have made a lot of bucks if they'd had a video camera trained on my driveway. Definitely would have won.
It was only a couple weeks ago that I went down into a almost full split in the middle of the
Oh dear.
It was nice to know I still have that kind of flexibility. It was great.
Chad, we don't have a ton of people still joining. We'll probably get started.
Maybe another minute, then we can just go and people can just catch as catch can. We shall not punish the punctual, in the words of Bob. Elisa has the most aggressive climate shifts in her background picture. She goes from like tropical island to snow-covered forest.
I have to say, I've gotten sensitive to the incongruity of what I'm wearing. A monstrous outdoor sweater, wool, etc., cables and all, and the palm.
Sitting under a palm tree.
That's just sometimes it's just wrong to wear a sweater to the beach. So I've gone back to the winter, and maybe it's because I'm excited about the snow we're supposed to have on coming up. It could be pretty, even if it's hard to drive in.
I have to say, I meant to mention it to you yesterday. We've been on a couple of calls now the last couple of days. Elisa has this picture of like two palm trees on an island, very nice ocean scene in the back. But there's this sheet metal tube at the top of the palm tree. And for the longest time, I was like, who do you have to stop from climbing a palm tree? Like, is it a squirrel? Like, what slithers up a palm tree that sheet metal tube prevents it from happening?
I think it might be insects. I actually think that that copper, something about the copper metal around there prevents the insects. I think it might be termites. If I'm thinking about it, that picture is from Grand Cayman. So they definitely have, termites, and, they love the sand, right? So that's what I'm thinking. I don't know. It could also be their iguana population that is so out of whack that they pay people to bring them in and not to breed and go any further.
Yeah, I was like, are there really squirrel problems and trouble? Like, what gets up in palm tree? Like,
Yeah.
Oh, that's good. He runs up every day. All right, as exciting as that is, that's probably not why people came. So we will go ahead and transition into COVID talk. So we'll go ahead and get started since it's 12:18. So welcome back, everybody. A few things to talk about, maybe not quite as exciting on my end, but then LJ can play Debbie Downer as she is wont to do these days and bring in her piece. So a couple interesting tidbits. So last time we got together, we talked about this kind of fascinoma of this Omicron stealth that was Omicron-esque, but had some candid shots that looked like Delta. And lo and behold, in the week since we talked about it, Omicron stealth, now B.2 variant, is the predominant Omicron strain in the US that's been identified, and it was 65% of all cases identified in Western New York as of last week. The importance of that is it is 1.5 times as transmissible as Omicron B.1, which is what we have been dealing with over the last several weeks and since the holidays, which was about maybe as much as 8-fold more transmissible than Delta. So it is a highly transmissible form of the virus. Fortunately, it does not appear to be any more likely to cause moderate to severe manifestations of disease. So the severity of illness appears largely unchanged from Omicron, but the transmissibility is that much higher. So because of that, you could make a couple of arguments. One, the reason that we are seeing a downward trend, but some slight flattening of that downward trend, is because B.2 is that much more transmissible, and so it is pervading that much faster, and therefore it is slowing the downward course from B.1, which is what we had seen in South Africa and some other European countries. The other potential is that if you are a pandemic ender, this could be becoming more and more of what you would hope the virus would be, in that it is not getting more severe in manifestation, but is getting more transmissible. So that would theoretically mean, as long as it's causing mainly mild forms of disease, that this could be the thing that pushes us towards endemicity rather than pandemicity that much faster. So it's kind of an interesting tidbit. The expectation is that it will rapidly become, and may already be, well over 90% of the strains currently in existence. And as I've said before, part of the supposition is that the reason we are still detecting Delta is that B.2 can be confused as Delta on some PCR testing. So it may be that not only is it, as of last week, 65%, but it's also all of the residual Delta cases that we're finding, because we're certainly not seeing as much of the same severity of illness that we did during the Delta wave. So where does that leave us? We are certainly still, we are coming down from where we were. We are seeing hospitalization start to decrease. ICU is not decreasing as rapidly yet, but we have seen a little bit of a decrease in the Finger Lakes region. We are still seeing a fairly reasonable case volume every day, and that may persist with the Omicron stealth strain spreading more rapidly amongst those who are not infected, and even potentially amongst those who have been previously vaccinated, as we know that the vaccinated folks do still seem to acquire Omicron, but with much milder and oftentimes completely asymptomatic forms of the illness. The good news is that if you look at Omicron B.1, the prevailing strain as of a couple weeks ago, it not only appeared susceptible to our current vaccines, but actually appeared reasonably susceptible to just those who had the first primary dose sequence of their vaccination. So Moderna and Pfizer 2-dose, J&J 1-dose, those folks seem to have fairly adequate, or pretty much as good as those who had gotten boosted, protection against B.1. There has been some data in the last 24 hours, really just as of this morning, that showed that the booster may actually be necessary to convey the same protection that we saw with B.1 for those who are vaccinated, which is to say, if you have not received a booster, B.2, you may be more likely to develop symptoms or contract COVID if you have only had your primary vaccination series. So the booster may be more protective against this emerging strain than it was necessary against the initial strain of Omicron, where just the primary vaccination series oftentimes seemed to be sufficient in and of itself. So that's important, because one of the big topics of conversation is the booster mandate in New York State. And with that, for those who potentially would get medical exemptions, as the discussion has been, that the severity of Omicron and the risk for those who got the primary vaccination series may have been less, such that there would be a more lenient allowance for medical exemptions for the booster this time around. One of the other interesting conversations that has come up is, would people need to be tested if they do have medical exemptions? So one of the things before, if you had a medical or religious exemption, is you had to consent to weekly testing. However, if you were just as well protected by the primary vaccination series, you may be able to make a valid scientific argument that weekly testing was not necessary because the booster wasn't providing any additional benefit for that particular strain. That may not be true for B.2. So for B.2, the booster does seem to provide additional benefit, and therefore you may advocate that the booster mandate is beneficial, and that if you do not adhere to the booster mandate, that weekly testing would be the alternative. I shouldn't say do not adhere if you have medical exemption or reason that you cannot get the booster. So all of these are kind of interesting tidbits. Obviously, the data is still very early and kind of too early to call at this moment. But we are seeing the continual perpetuation of genetic drift of the virus as we expected we would. There is some discussion that because the vaccination progress in third world countries in particular, but non-industrialized nations in general, is still very slow, that it is likely that we will continue to see genetic drift and continued mutations in the global realm in general. And so we will continue to see these new strains develop, and then they will spread just because of the global nature of today's economy. And so we will continue to see reintroduction of these new strains into the population. What we don't know is will a strain ever mutate and become more severe? So clearly, from a genetic drift standpoint, the virus is trying to sustain itself. So you could argue that B.2 is doing an excellent job of that. It is now somewhere on the order of 10 to 12 times more transmissible than what alpha and beta coronavirus were in the beginning of the pandemic. It just doesn't cause the severity, which in virus world, it doesn't really want to kill you. It just wants to keep you going so you can spread it to somebody else. So it keeps all its little friends happy. So Omicron B2 is doing an excellent job of doing that, unless you're in the unvaccinated, which does seem to be a group that is still significantly at risk. So that's a lot of talk to just say we've got a cooler strain of Omicron. We do not yet have pi, which I can't wait for the t-shirts when it comes out that says I got my pi or something like that for when we have a pi strain. So we'll see what happens there. I kind of want a pi booster. I think that would be super cool to have. But that is hopefully never to come, but would be kind of fun and enjoyable just because this is getting a little bit sadistic at this point anyway. So that's where we stand. The other very good news is that Pfizer submitted yesterday their request to the FDA for approval for vaccination in the 5 and under group. So this would now mean we can globally have access to vaccination for the entire population, which would be excellent. It is also one of the thoughts of ways that we would significantly push towards endemic status in the US is if we can get all age groups vaccinated, because we still have transmission through that younger unvaccinated age group as well. So the anticipation is that, or at least the word on the street from popular press that I can find, is that it is anticipated that will likely move through fairly quickly. And so probably by end of this month or in March, we should potentially be able to see vaccination starting for that youngest age group. At the same time, Moderna got official FDA approval. So we are no longer under emergency use for either Pfizer or Moderna at this point. So for folks who have been hesitant about acceptance of these vaccines because they have not been officially FDA approved, we now have 2 options. Granted, both of those are the mRNA vaccines. So folks who have issues with the mRNA vaccine, either politically or in general, may still not be satiated by that particular development, but it does push us that much closer to widely sanctioned vaccines. And I think the trade name for the Mrna Vax is Spike Vax or something like that, which it's at least got a very cool name, if nothing else. You got to give them credit for that. So I guess it's spike protein, but hey, I give them credit for it. That was pretty handy. So that's where we stand right now. The other pieces is we are supposed to start seeing the federal testing kits to every household. Those are supposed to start disseminating. They were anticipating by early February. So probably within the next couple of weeks, we should see those start to hit mailboxes. There's already a discussion about another release of those potentially coming right behind, and potentially N95s making it into the kind of free distribution realm as well. I will say, for anyone who received, I think we've talked about this before, but the state had a pretty large supply of KN95s that they distributed. I think about 60% of those have now been found to be counterfeit. So even the municipalities are not immune from receiving counterfeit materials. So unfortunately, there are websites that you can Google that you can identify if your KN95 is in fact counterfeit. I have seen a couple of these. Some of them just have holes, like it's just open air ventilation systems essentially. So it doesn't take a lot of investigation. You could probably hold it up to a light and tell it yourself in many cases. But just know if you were the recipient of any of those state distributed, there is a reasonable chance, better than 50-50, that they were in fact counterfeit, unfortunately. So that's something we'll have to kind of overcome as well. Although the federal release is supposed to be from the federal stockpile, so the anticipation is that those should not be counterfeit. So I think that those are the big topics that I had. I will pause and hand it over to Elton.
Thanks, Chad. First of all, I just want for our providers who care for children and adolescents to be aware that we definitely are seeing an uptick in cases of MIS-C. Just to share with you the numbers for perspective, I have from the hospitalist teams and infectious disease teams that there have been 7 cases within the last 3 weeks. And for comparison, there were three cases in the preceding 5 months. So I think we all have, we've had the opportunity to learn more about this when there's a huge spike in cases of COVID-19 in the pediatric population. What follows about 4 weeks later is then a spike in the cases of MIS-C. And this was definitely the largest spike in pediatric and adolescent cases that we had seen. So I'm not hearing from our teams that they feel like it's a different response to Omicron or anything like that, but it's still following in this pattern. And so I wanted for our teams out there, you are the ones who are seeing these kids and maybe seeing them coming back in, and to please remember, we will re-up in the messaging. I'm just thinking about this, Jana and Renee, if we can just re-highlight the symptom presentation with MIS-C and essentially, if you have concerns or are not quite sure with a patient, you certainly can call pediatric infectious disease. The ED teams, are ready to help in assessment of those kids as well. So I just wanted people to be aware. It's an important point. I wanted to talk for a minute about changes to return to play. We sent out an email message on Monday highlighting that the AAP did make a revision that they released on Friday morning of last week to their return to play guidance. So I'm going to walk you through just the high points of the changes and explain what new little thing we introduced that we hope will make things be a little easier. So Gina or Renee, I don't know if it's possible to share even just like the context of you want to go to maybe our webpage where it sort of provides that summary. But in essence, in terms of the bullet points with this is fine. This is the algorithm. So here is my brief synopsis. Because the AAP guidance is now a little more focused on the groups that have greater likelihood of having any kind of myocarditis, and because they definitely clarified some of the issues about when can these kids be evaluated? Is it 10 days after they've had their positive test or confirmed diagnosis, or is it, when they're released from isolation? You're going to see that the guidance document here that we're showing looks a lot more like the AAP guidance and less like the old algorithm we had. The goal here is to move closer and closer to what the AAP, is doing and have there be less confusion. At the same time, I would highlight that this is our revision to the AAP guidance because we did not feel there was a need to take a step backwards. The AAP guidance does still say that every kid who's had COVID should have some sort of a telephonic assessment or a televideo visit with a PCP. We had not been doing that. We had been focusing on the high priority groups and we continue to do that. But in order to educate the community better and hopefully identify those kids who really should be coming in to see you for an assessment, we did develop a self-assessment tool, which I'll review in just a minute. But the main things in this guidance are that a child should be evaluated if they fall into moderate or severe symptom category. They should be receiving a healthcare provider evaluation before they return to exercise, to sports. If they are, they should be not only released from isolation, but their symptoms should be resolved with the exclusion of symptoms of loss of taste or smell, which can go on forever. Not forever, but for a long time. And they should be fever-free for 24 hours. But essentially, if you look at this from a parent perspective or from a school perspective, these kids can potentially get back into exercise more quickly, and they can be assessed more quickly and can get back into exercise more quickly. So our priority groups, again, remain kids age 5 and up who have experienced moderate to severe symptoms. And then there's a highlighted guideline for gradual return to play for those youth 12 and older, specifically in competitive or high intensity sports. That's basically what we were looking at before. The revision to the gradual return to play is a piece that is different in here, and that is over a shorter period. It's not that laborious, day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6. It's really over a 3 to 5 day period. So if you're not having any significant symptoms and you didn't fall in that moderate category for symptoms or severe, you can get back in basically 5 plus 3. You can be released from isolation at day 5 and back into your full stuff at 3 days. All of that is very specifically in the algorithm and the guidance. So here's the thing that we felt they did call out very specifically that there are no restrictions on return to play for kids who are asymptomatic or had mild symptoms and who are not engaged in competitive sports. So they specifically mentioned that. We've been talking about that for a while. These kids can go back into activity. So it answers that question that comes up over and over again. What about PE? What about a 7-year-old? What can we do? Those kids, it calls out that they can get back in on their own, as they're comfortable and as they're able to do their own thing. But the thing that we really wanted to highlight to our teams is, the AAP guidance does, first of all, encourage families not to have their kids be active in sports and exercising when they're in isolation, so when they're symptomatic. And then how do we actually know who is in the moderate category? Because with so many people self-reporting a positive test, how are they going to know who's moderate and who's not? So we took the old assessment form, we moved it into a self-assessment form. We are asking that any hospitalized patients with COVID receive this form. We're sharing this with EDs and urgent care. So if they are suspecting or running a test on a patient for COVID, they can hand this form to the family and it walks them through basically what would categorize a higher risk situation or what would be a symptom by which they would want to access care in your office. And the thing that we're doing right now, we hope that you guys will use this also. If you're seeing a patient and you've had run a rapid in your office and it's positive, go ahead and hand this to them. It just makes all of the communication a little more straightforward. By signing the document below, if they answer negatively to all of the questions in that, then a parent could actually sign that. So if the school is asking for some type of attestation around symptoms, the family could use that. And what we're in the process of doing right now is taking this form and just adding a second page for you all where you can check self-attestation form reviewed, negative or positive physical exam, EKG indicated or not, and whether it was positive or negative, and then you can sign the return to play, or you're referring them on to cardiology for more stuff. So just trying to make this thing be a lot less cumbersome for everybody on the school end, on the healthcare provider end. Again, here's the key thing. This is not a mandate. So some schools will take this and will try to implement very carefully. I have to be honest with you, the Buffalo schools are like awesome about this. They want to engage and do this stuff. Here locally, it's a little different. So there's going to be variations. All you can do is say, this is clinical guidance. This is my recommendation. But by having some of these forms, oh gosh, I just read the comment from 12 Corners. That's a really good idea, to have a kid do the PACER test on their first day back from COVID. Like this is the places where we should be stepping in and saying, no, please don't do that. That doesn't make any sense. And educating our school teams. I lost my train of thought here. I just can't even believe that. So anyway, I hope that this will help clarify things a little bit more in this space. And that is all I have to say. So here's the other things we want to cover. Masking. So I just want to make people aware, some may be aware more so than others. Some school districts are now sending out surveys to their families about whether they support optional masking, and sort of asking for parent opinion around masking. My understanding from talking to at one district is that they feel that this is a way to engage people for a time when it will no longer be a mandate and will be a decision of individual schools. I don't think anybody knows when that will be. We have tried to articulate to all of the school districts that, masking is a decision that it's science, and it's a public health and a medical decision. It's not for public opinion, but these things are going to keep happening in your district. So I would encourage, as the healthcare teams that are on this call, if it happens within your district, don't just fill out the survey, send an email to your superintendent, ask for a call, ask for an opportunity to talk about that process, make sure that you educate very strongly about how that masking is not to be an issue of personal opinion. I can tell you in my case, I now am on the committee that's going to be reviewing all of this in Pittsford School District, who started this. And I expect it's true in other cases. So we need to have people who understand the science behind this to be advising these groups so that it doesn't turn into a complete wild, wild west, especially when we still have all of these younger kids not yet immunized. And that is the last thing for me, is to talk about prep for kids' vaccines. We've got a nice collaborative working relationship here right now, obviously, where many of you are vaccinating in your practices. The county is utilizing in a partnered effort, having pediatric trained providers in those spaces for their community clinics and centralized clinics. The GCH pediatric practice now has an open community clinic that is vaccinating all families. Like, we have a lot of opportunities, but I think tonight at the PCP advisory committee meeting for peds, which is happening, I would like for the team, some of you are on this call now, I'd like you to come prepared to talk about, are you okay and are you ready to vaccinate those younger kids? Are there barriers that we're not anticipating that we need to be talking about right now? Because we certainly did a lot with the 5 to 11 that we could, consider for reactivating if we need to. And then my last comment, I want to turn it to Kim Povek, because I know she has some things to say about pediatric vaccine. My last comment is, I don't know if people are aware, but the AAP released information based on national data that the vaccination rate for 5 to 11-year-olds who have received one vaccine, this was as of last week, was 21%. So in Monroe County, if you look specifically in Monroe County, we are reaching, or over 38% of those kids having had their first dose. For the region, it's closer to nearly 34%. But it's a substantive improvement over what's happening nationally. And I would just say kudos to all of you. It's not where we want to be. We want to be further along. But I think that we just have to keep up the many different opportunities where families can be receiving vaccine, where they can hear accurate information about it, where they can have conversations with trusted providers. So Kim, I wonder if you have anything else that you want to add?
I'll just be brief, but I also just wanted to provide some context on our ongoing partnership with the county and on our pediatric efforts. So the AHP team really believes in supporting this work and supporting pediatric vaccination, so much so that AHP has partnered with Golisano Children's Hospital, who has a new established partnership with the county. So just a huge shout out and thank you to GCH and everything LJ has done to advocate. And also a huge thanks to AHP leadership for allowing us to put some more efforts behind this. So there's now a team of 4 of us at AHP who are staffing and showing up to pediatric vaccine clinics. So Jana, who you all know, Jana's been huge help in this effort, stepping right up to the plate. Same thing with Kevin Kelly. I'm not sure if he's on this call today. And also Renee Sutton. When there was a need, this team just stepped up and said, yes, this is important work that we want to support. We want to support the kids in our network. So I say all that to say that for the month of February, we will be, URMC will be staffing pediatric vaccine clinics on North Goodman Street, a few blocks south of the old Bausch and Lomb building. And so if you have patients in that area who are from that community, or just have patients in general who are looking for peds vaccines, that would be a location that they could come to. We'll be open 9 to 3 o'clock on Saturday. I believe it's the next 4 Saturdays of February. So again, just a huge thanks to the AHP team and also Monroe County for providing these opportunities. So if you have any questions about sending your kiddos to get vaccinated in the community, please just reach out to us and we'd be happy to share that information.
Thanks, Kim. And then Dr. Elizabeth Marie, do you have anything we'd like to add?
Do you want to hear it or not? I mean,
Yes, go for it.
all right, I'm going to share my screen. Here we go.
I think there may be a couple things in the chat. I specifically noticed the question about missed C cases, wondering whether or not there were any predictors, any relation to vaccinated or not. So I think that, the GCH team continues to collaborate with others, looking at these cases and in aggregate, as well as what we're seeing here. I cannot comment on that specifically, but I think it would be timely to bring one of our colleagues from Peds ID or one of the hospitalists into our meeting next week and allow them just to give a really quick synopsis on a little more detail on the missed C cases. If that's okay for folks, we will plan to do that. All right. Chad, I think you answered the other question. We don't know what the Johns Hopkins study is. I just did some quick checking as in terms of what they might be referring to. So I don't know if it's if that individual can share that information or share that link with us, that would be great. We can look into it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That'd be great because I haven't heard about any new things from Hopkins, but that doesn't mean it didn't happen. So always interested, especially if it's suddenly becoming popular lore. Renee, do you have anything else? Or Jana, anything?
I am just sharing that we did have some new updates on the website. So we went in and added, New York State released some guidance on Medicaid policies and billing for COVID at home tests. So you guys can take a look at that. It's up on our website. We also have all of the return to play infographics, algorithms, etc. Those are up as well. But those are the docs.
I guess I'd say one thing, Chad, or two things. Pediatric PCP tonight. Everyone should have their invite. That starts at 7 o'clock. And I want to just point out, we have a new AHP team member on the call today. Cherie Turpin is our new provider data coordinator at AHP. She's going to be working on ensuring that all of our information about our offices is up to date and correct, and developing processes for obtaining updates on a regular basis. So I just want to welcome Cherie to AHP and to the COVID call.
Hello, nice to meet you.
All right. Anybody else have any other questions? I think we have run the chat. We've got a couple minutes left, or else we'll give you 8 minutes of your life back. All right, we'll call it a day. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week. Take care.